Hi, I am Ziad, and this is going to be a casual recording of data processing in Visual3D. This is part 2 of 2. Part 1 was processing your data in Vicon, and this includes labeling your subject, creating segments, gap filling, and exporting your data. So this is picking up where the first part left off. And here we are assuming that you have your data exported and ready, and it is in C3D formats. Step 1 is to load up your data files. So we will click on the open, the yellow folder here, and make sure that you navigate to the directory where you have saved your C3D files. So this is the directory where I have my files. What I'll be loading is the 5 dynamic trials. I will not load the static trial just yet. Okay, so I'll select all 5 and I'll hit open. So these now have come up under the motion files. Next, I will press on the model tab. And by the way, this 90 or 95% of our work today will be in this tab, so don't get too confused with anything else here, because none of this is really relevant for our course. So go to the model, click on create add static calibration file, and then click on hybrid model from C3D file. So click on that, and again, so you'll be prompted to input or open up a C3D file for the calibration. So here sometimes, so Visual3D calls it calibration. We usually call it static trials. Sometimes in the literature you will see this being called noise trial. Essentially it is a trial where you have your subject standing still with all of the markers visible, obviously without any gaps. So that is what we mean by calibration or static or noise. So here I'll select this one and then I'll press open. Next I'll be prompted with selecting, so the selected model is the model that we just selected, which is a static. Then I'm asked to associate this static trial with the other trials. So what we want to do is, after we do our work on the static trial, we want the work that we do be applied on the dynamic trials so that we don't have to repeat our work 6 times. Okay? So all that I'll do here is I'll select these 5 checkboxes and then I'll hit OK. Alright, so that is done. Now we have a preview of the markers and the floor, and this is, if I click on any marker now, this has the label that we defined in Vicon. So this is the LIPS, this should be the RIPS, this should be the RICT, and this matches the naming scheme that we've used in Vicon. Alrighty, now we're ready to create our segments. So on the left, you are already in the segments. It automatically opens the segments tab, and then underneath, this is also the segments sub tab or subcategory. So we'll stay on here. The first segment, this is the lower body model, and we have the right side. So we'll be creating a pelvis, a right thigh, a right shank, and a right foot. So in total it will be 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, you always want to start with the pelvis. For lower body, start with the pelvis so that you are orienting everything, and then everything then becomes much easier. If you were to start with the foot and go upwards, it's much more difficult and it's less intuitive. So let's start with the pelvis. If you go here on the segment name, there's a drop-down menu. Here you have different segment names. Each of these segments has its predefined properties. So it is linked with a skeleton part, like it's linked with the pelvis model, it has different properties and settings. So we want to leverage these properties, and that is why we want to select different names or segments from this list. We don't want to create our own. So click on pelvis. Now for the segment type, if I were to pull up the has motion, let me put this to the left here and this to the right. So here I've pulled the has motion guidelines, marker set guidelines, and from the Vicon tutorial I said we use the Visual3D pelvis, and indeed this is the Visual3D pelvis. Visual3D pelvis is composed of 6 markers, so 2 at the back and 4 at the front, whereas Coda pelvis has 4 markers, 2 at the front and 2 at the back. The ones at the back are shared, so the LIPS, RIPS are shared between the Visual3D pelvis and the Coda pelvis. However, the markers at the front, which is the RICT, LICT, and this stands for the ilium crest tubercle, or the ilium crest for short, the RFT and LFT, which are the femur greater trochanters, are not the same as these 2 markers. These are the ACES points, which is the anterior superior iliac spine. So it is actually inferior to the RICT and LICT, and these 2 markers are superior to the RFT and LFT and more medial, closer to the center of the body. Now, the reason why I'm saying all of these things and doing this comparison with Visual3D pelvis and the Coda pelvis is because if you were to pick Visual3D pelvis, it's going to be a lot more tedious to get the processing done, and some of this is actually beyond the scope of this course. So in the past, students, we've kind of taken a simplification step here, and we have used the Coda pelvis, even if we have Visual3D pelvis, for the sake to make processing a little more straightforward for everyone. Now, if you have not collected your data already, I would highly suggest that you go with the Coda pelvis, just to make your lives easier and to stick with the appropriate guidelines. But the truth of the matter is, even if you've chosen the Visual3D pelvis during data collection, the idea of you placing the markers on the iliac crest precisely, on the iliac crests precisely, is it's very hard to attain the same position, and because of different artifacts, skin artifacts, even your clothes moving around, the difference between RICT, LICT, and RIAS and LIAS is insignificant, so we will be making that approximation. But just as an advice, if you're collecting for the first time, go with the Coda pelvis. Alright, now that out of the way, and hopefully this clarified why we're going with the Coda pelvis, let's select Coda pelvis. So here we have 4 options. Really, the Helen Hayes is a different model. It uses 3 markers. The V3D composite is based on Visual3D as well. We'll go with the Coda. Alright, so and then we'll hit create. Here we're prompted to record the body mass and the height, so it is advised that you take these measurements during the data collection day. So here the weight is 75 and the height is 1.75. We'll hit OK. Now let me make this bigger. Visual3D already picked 2 of these points, and they're already color coded. So the green ones in the back, Vicon already established that those are the RIPS is associated with the right PSIS, and the LIPS is associated with the left PSIS. So that's perfect. For the ones in the front, for the ACES points, again recall, let me put this back. So it is expecting these points. We will approximate them with these points for the sake of this tutorial. So for the right ACES, we will go with the RICT. RICT, and then for the left axis we will go with the LICT. So now we have all of those selected. And then for this we can uncheck, and then we can here include our tracking markers. So we're assuming that our RFT and LFT are tracking markers in addition to all of the other markers. These markers essentially help to ensure that the model and the segment is being tracked for the entire trial. Now you can hit apply, and then here you're getting your pelvis. So pelvis is showing. Notice the other advantage with the Coda pelvis actually is it automatically creates two new landmarks, which is the right hip and the left hip. And these landmarks are crucial when we go and create our right thigh. And if you have a left thigh as well, you can do that as well. But these markers are, or these landmarks I should say, are crucial. The difference between a marker and a landmark is a marker is like a physical marker or sphere that you've put on the subject, and this is coming from Vicon. But this one, we didn't have it during data collection. Visual3D has created it for us, and we can find this by, let's close this tab. If we go to landmarks, here we have the right hip landmark and the left hip landmark. So right hip, this is the position in space, and this is the equation that Visual3D has used to determine where the right hip is and where the left hip is. Okay, now that pelvis is out of the way, we can advance and do the right thigh. So for the right thigh, first let's choose the segment name. From the drop-down menu, select right thigh. For the segment type, it's not gonna be as confusing as the pelvis because there's only one option, Visual3D. Alright, so we'll just keep that option. Then we'll hit create. Now here we are prompted with inputting different parameters. We have two sections or three sections here: the proximal section, the distal and extra targets, and the tracking in the bottom, or the clusters. So for the proximal, we are working from top to bottom. So you can think of the femur or the femoral head being the proximal, and this is proximal to the previous segment, which is the pelvis. All right, lateral is away from the body, so the more we go this way, the more lateral we're going, and the more we're going in the direction of my cursor. So from left to right is more medial. Okay, so because we have a landmark right hip, we can actually pick that as the joint center, so we don't have to select anything for lateral and anything for medial. So for joint center, let's click on the right hip. Now for the radius, what we'll do here is we will write a small equation, and this will tell us the radius exactly and precisely. So the equation reads as follows. It's going to be 0.5 times the distance between the right hip and the left hip. So that's the equation. Recall, right hip and left hip are landmarks that Visual3D has created. So Visual3D understands what right hip is and left hip is, and distance is a function that we can utilize. So this is finding our radius dynamically. Next, for the distal, we will choose the markers that correspond with the furthest points of our femur or of our thigh. So ignore this. So this is a part of the pelvis. Don't worry about this. These are clusters, so we'll ignore those for now. This is where the knee is. So these are the two markers of interest. Now this one is the lateral marker and this one is the medial marker. So for lateral, we will choose RFLE, And for the medial, we'll choose RFME. RFME. So that's it. So these three are selected. Now for tracking, or for the targets, or for the clusters, this also has multiple names, so sorry for the confusion. Here, let's click on one and find the name. Sometimes Visual3D is lags a little bit, so if this happens to you, just choose the, so this one I know it's RTH, and you can always pick a marker and then see if it's being highlighted. So if I pick this one, it highlighted the one for the foot, I'm gonna remove the selection. But for these, I know that these are RTH 1 to 4, so I'll pick those. But usually when you click on a marker, you should see the name of the marker. Alrighty, so now we've selected the joints markers and the cluster markers. We're ready to click on apply. And there you go. This is the femur. It looks good. It looks aligned. I don't see any issues with it. This means that we can move forward. So I'll close the tab. Alright, now that we have the pelvis and the right thigh done, we're ready to move on to the shank. So for the segment name, I'll click on right shank. Here for the segment type, we'll keep it as Visual3D, and we'll hit create. So for the shank, we don't have a joint center. We can create a landmark between RFME and the RFLE, but this is extra work. So we can create a landmark in the middle and then do what we did above, but that is not necessary. What we can do, the easiest method here, is to pick the two shared markers that we used for the right thigh. We can use those for the right shank as well. So for the lateral, proximal marker here, we'll pick RFLE, and then now it highlighted it. And then for the medial, we will pick the RFME. Alright, so those two are picked. Now for the distal ones, so we have, similarly to the top, we have a cluster here, so we'll ignore this for now. We will select this later. But the two other markers of interest to define the distal end of our shank are the RFAL and the RTAM. Okay, so we'll select those. So for the medial, let's start with the medial. We have that selected. That is RTAM. Let's find it. RTAM. Here you go. Yeah, these, like, because of the acronyms, you can lose these pretty quickly. So spend your time and make sure you're choosing the right one. So I'll select RTAM. And for the lateral, it is RFAL. Perfect. All four are highlighted. Next, we will choose the tracking. So for the tracking, we have 4, and they are RSK1, RSK2, RSK3, and RSK4. And now we have everything selected. We're ready to press apply. Perfect. Our shank has been constructed and it looks perfect. It's aligned. It looks amazing. We will close the tab. Now, last but not least, is the right foot. So for the segment name, we'll pick right foot. Segment type, keep it as Visual3D and hit create. So for the proximal, we will use the two shared markers, which is the RTAM for the medial and RFAL for the lateral marker, for the lateral proximal marker. So for the medial, we'll choose RTAM, and for the lateral, RFAL. All right. In terms of the distal, for the lateral, we'll choose the VMH, and for the medial, which is closest to the center of the body, this is close to the big toe, and this is close to the pinky toe, just for reference. So this is SMH. For the medial, we'll choose SMH. All right, and then the only thing that remains is the tracking markers. So here, let's just remind ourselves of the names: VMB, and then we have ST, which is this one, and then this one is the CA. And then we can hit apply. And we have our foot. Okay. Foot is constructed. We can press on the close tab. And that is it. So this is the lower body kinematic model, all built. The segments, which includes, just a quick recap, the pelvis. And for the pelvis, we've chosen the coda pelvis. Now, if you have a coda pelvis, you have no issues. But if you have a Visual3D pelvis, this is the workarounds. The right thigh, we've used a joint center, and we had that equation in order to find the radius dynamically, which utilized the right hip and the left hip. We have tracking, two sets of tracking markers, 4 on the right thigh and 4 on the right shank, and these two were common. They were the distal, these two markers, they were the distal for the femur and the proximal for the shank. Same with these two in the bottom. These two were the distal markers for the shank, but were the proximal for the foot. And that is it. Now we're ready to move into the next step. It's very important that you save your workspace. So find the save button here in the top left corner. Press on it and save your compressed workspace, which is going to be in CMZ format, into a directory of your choice. Make sure you save it in a place that you can find it later. So I'll call this lower body visual 3D data processing, and hit save. And that is it. Make sure you save often. Next, now we have created the segments model. We want to apply this to our dynamic models. So we will hit recalculate. And here, and we'll see we have no errors, no warnings, and essentially in the log it's telling us that it had computed the pose for all of the dynamic trials that we've loaded earlier. This is a good sign. If you have an issue, make sure you read what the issue is stating. It could be multiple different things, so make sure you read it and then follow the procedure that it outlines. If you need help, make sure you reach out. But if you have followed the same steps, if you have opened up your dynamic trials first by clicking on the open button, then you want to model and created the calibration, so the create add static calibration file, and you clicked hybrid model from C3D file, and you've loaded your static, and you've gone through and created the segments, and you've hit recalculate. If you follow the steps in this exact order, you shouldn't have an issue. but if you do, always make sure you reach out. Now that we have created all of the segments and we have done recalculation to apply what we've done on the static trial to the dynamic trials, we're ready to perform some calculations. So if you go to the Signals and Events tab, then here on the top right, notice this is the current file. So right now we are in the dynamic trial 2. Okay, and you can even run this and kind of check it out. Check how everything articulates, and we can check the trial. I can kind of fast forward a bit. There you go. Okay, same thing. Let me go to this one, and this is number 4, so you can see you can have a preview for the files. The reason why this is important is because whatever file you're on, this is what, if I were to do calculations, it's going to be only for this file. So what I always recommend students would do to save time and to avoid repetition is you can conveniently choose all files. Okay, then in order to calculate something like the knee angle, you can go to the model. You can do press on the compute model based data. Here I can give it knee angles. For the folder, I'm going to choose original, and then model based item properties. So this is the list of all of the different functionalities and computations that Visual3D can perform. It includes things like, calculating the force, torque, moments, a lot of things. So what we're interested in for the sake of this tutorial is joint angle. So I'll press on this. Then here we are asked to provide a segment and a reference segment. So for the segments, I'm going to pick the right thigh, and for reference segment, I am going to be picking right shank. And because the knee is in the middle, I have to choose the segment above the knee and the segment below the knee. So the segment above the knee is the right thigh, the segment below the knee is the right shank. I'm going to keep the same cardan sequence, XYZ. I'll hit create. And now this is just confirming that it has applied this computation to all of the trials from 1 to 5. So this is great. We have no errors. So we can press OK and close. Now if I were to open up Dynamic Trial 2, on the left, if I go to Link Model Based folder under Original, I see knee angles. So this is the knee angles data corresponding to this trial. Okay. You can, if you right click, you can graph each component separately if you're interested. It's gonna show it on the right, or you can graph everything, and this is just bigger. One neat feature in Visual3D is Visual3D allows you to plot your graphs on the right side, while on the left you can have a preview of the trial. And if you were to play the trial, you'll notice that there's this cursor moving, and then you're getting the live preview of what's happening in the trial at that exact point. And you can pause and analyze depending on what you want. As you can see, the Y components and the Z components of the knee angle data is quite noisy. It's not as clean as the X components, as we can see here in the top graph. In order to fix this, we should consider applying some sort of a low pass filter. To do this, let's go to the pipeline command here. This is the pipeline workshop. It is the second powerhouse of Visual3D. The first one was the different computation model calculations that we can apply, and we chose to apply the joint angle. The second powerhouse is this one. This has a bunch of commands that we can use, ranging from filters to different model building and biofeedback, etc. There's a lot you can explore on your own, but for the purposes of this tutorial, I want to show you how to apply filters. So let's navigate to the signal filter here, open this up, and then here you'll see all different types of filters. The one that we're interested in is the low pass filter, so I'll double click on it, and this is showing you a preview of the properties of this filter. So it is a low pass filter with a 6 Hz cutoff frequency, and it is of the Butterworth class. So we have to select some signals to apply this filter to, and we will be selecting the markers, because if we apply the filter on the marker trajectories, then our knee angles, which are based on the marker trajectory data, should also be filtered by extension. So let's here on the left open up targets and select original here. And then since we've selected the original, sometimes this goes inactive, so try to click on the screen here on this window for this button to be activated. Then you can click import selected signals. Then you can hit execute pipeline, and then here this is giving you a preview, no errors, no warnings, and this is a preview of the filter. And be careful, this only applied it to dynamic trial 2.c3d, no other files. So to fix this, what we do is we go here and we select all files. Okay, don't worry about this, this is a little messy, but we will click on recalculate. And what this did is it applied the filter to all of these files, and that is what we needed. Let's go back to a single file just so that we can carry on with the demo. You'll notice how clean of a signal we have now. So the Y and Z, it's almost like a night and day difference. This is much cleaner, much easier to look at and analyze. You can play the trial again just to see what's happening. And here, this is, by the way, I sped it up, so you can also do that, or you can slow it down. Now that we have processed our data and we've applied a filter, next we will create a report and export the data. So I'll click on reports. Here I'll click on ads. And here, don't get overwhelmed with what's going on here. There are 3 things that I would like you to pay attention to. First, here, the location. This is where you would change your page numbers. So I'll start with page 1. Here for the x-axis data, keep this as it is. So it's going to be frame numbers and then time. For the y-axis data, here, keep this as link model based and the folder original, but for the name, choose whatever data you want. So here I have knee angles, but you might have hip angles or elbow angles, etc. For the components, you can choose x-axis, y-axis, or z-axis, or if you want multiple, you can do x-axis on one page and then create a new page. For page 2, you do y-axis, etc. Now that I'm ready, I'm gonna hit apply and then OK. So this is the x-axis information for all 5 trials. So as you can see here, this is page 1. Page 2, here we can add, and then we're in page 2. Now we're in page 2. I can select the knee angles, and I can select Y and then hit apply and OK. So now in page 1, we have the x-axis, in page 2 we have the y-axis. Now you might tell yourself, what can I do with this graph? It's very confusing, it doesn't have labels, it's hard to edit. You probably don't want to use all of these old school methods of creating a graph. So the good news is we can export the data, the raw data, into a TXT file where we can import it into Excel or MATLAB to create our own plots. So to do this, select the data stream or data of your choice here. So I'll go with knee angles, the X components, and then I'll press on export selected. Then I'll choose Y components. Don't click X components, it's going to confuse your output. And then click on raw data and then hit export. Here I'm going to call it knee angles X. It's going to be a text file. I'll hit save. Now you can navigate to your file directory and then locate the saved file, txt file. So I can double click on it, and then here I have my data, the knee angles. And you'll notice this is for this is for the 4 dynamic trial files. So dynamic trial 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then this is your data. Okay, so it spans for the 10 seconds that you have. If you were to export the X component, you will get double columns. Because I know that this is 10 seconds and I know the sampling, I can just reconstruct the X-axis on things like Excel or on MATLAB. But it's up to you. If you prefer to export the X component, you can do so. I'll leave that up to you. Congratulations, we have reached the end of the Visual3D tutorial. Now, just a quick recap. First, we have imported the dynamic trials to Visual3D. Next, we have imported the static trial. And we did this by going to model, create add static calibration file, and we imported the hybrid model. Then we applied the hybrid model to the dynamic trials. After that, we went to model, compute model-based data, and we computed the joint's angle for the knee. Then we went to the pipeline and we applied the low-pass filter to our data. And last but not least, we created reports by going to the add button and then adding in the X and Y axis information. Then we exported the selected data here. And thank you so much for tuning in. I hope this was helpful.